We've been constructing this course. We've added an assignment, we've added notes, we've added a discussion, and now it's time to add what is to many of us the main assessment piece, an exam and or quiz. So we're going to look at some of the best ways to do this in Blackboard as well as some of the better practices. Let's get started. In this video I'm going to build a quiz, a lecture exam, and a lab exam. And I have slightly different goals for each one of those exams, and that's why I think it's worth taking a look at each one of them just to think not only about how to actually build an exam, which I think you'll get at the very beginning, but also what are some of the best practices, especially going into this season where we're going to be offering a lot of our exams online at home. And again, it's worth mentioning that with many schools closing down, that they're likely to close their doors to testing centers and certainly can't make those testing centers available to all students since they have limited resources. And it's also very likely that some of the online proctoring services like ProctorU and a few others will probably be overworked as well and may not be available to a larger group of students, considering that now tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of students may be trying to access those. So it is clear to me that those resources will be very limited, and so you should be preparing to offer an online exam that they can take at home. Now this of course creates some problems. How do you keep them from cheating? How do you keep them from just copying things, working together, and answering these questions? Well, the short answer is you can't. However, you can limit their ability to do that to some degree. You can limit their ability to look up every answer, for instance, by having a time test. You can also limit their ability to work together by giving tests that are drawn from pools of questions so that not every test is the same. And I think that's going to be a pretty effective way to offer an assessment that will prevent or at least limit the amount of preparation that the students will need, or actually it will increase the amount of preparation that they will need going into that particular exam. Okay, so let's take a look at first a quiz. We're going to go to our module that we've been working on, Module 4, and we're going to go into my chapters. And so chapters, if you recall, I like to have a chapter quiz for each chapter. I'm going to go into the lecture material, and let's build the quiz for chapter 32. In a previous video we established, or we attached the notes. We uploaded PowerPoint notes, we uploaded a lecture video, and now we want to have a quiz. Now this is just a placeholder for us. We're going to make an assessment, we'll make a test, and you'll see based on the conditions that we set that we have different options for different tests. So in a quiz, I'm going to allow my students in this quiz to take it over and over and over again. And the point behind that, or the reasoning behind that, is that it's going to be a short quiz drawn from a large pool of questions, and I want them to practice. This is a best practice with courses like this, to allow students to test over and over and practice these types of questions. I also tell my students that a couple of these questions will show up on the test. So they don't see all of the test questions, but if they do the practice for the quiz, then they may recognize a couple of those questions when it comes time to take the exam. So let's go ahead and add a test, and we're going to create. We don't have any tests made currently. We're going to create a test. We're going to call it a Chapter 32 quiz. And I might also add descriptions here. This is a chapter quiz. You can take it as many times as you want. It will record the highest score. So you should know right off the bat that this is a quiz that they're going to take many times. They can get the full points, but this is not going to be a high stakes quiz. It's only going to be worth a few points. And the rationale again is that not only they're going to get a few points, so that's one incentive to take this quiz, but they also are going to potentially, or they will see a couple of these questions on the test. So they're getting double incentive here to take this quiz. And on top of that, it is well known that practicing chapter material through quizzing is a very effective way for studying, and so that's why I do it this way. Okay, I've now created my quiz. Now I have uploaded a variety of questions in pools. So based on previous videos that we've done, I've built pools for these various chapters. Now I actually uploaded these questions from another Blackboard course, and I'm going to show you in the supplementary video for this one. I'm going to show you how to copy and move those pools around in case you might have another Blackboard course that has questions in it that you want to use, or maybe a fellow faculty member does. But for now, we're just going to know that I do have pools of questions made in this course, and instead of creating questions like we did before, I'm going to go find questions to use in this course. And I'm going to, for a chapter quiz, just create a random block. This random block, and as I scroll down, I can see the various pools that I've made. Now I will show you those pools here in just a moment, just so you know what it looks like. But these are pools that I made inside of the test surveys and pools area. I need to find, I have an exam pool and I have a quiz pool for chapter 32. I'm going to click on the chapter 32 quiz pool, and I actually have to keep going down, and I have to pick what question types I want to show up. Now in this case, these are all multiple choice. I could click all pool questions, or I can select which ones I want them to see. I'm going to choose multiple choice, and these are all the multiple choice questions that are in that chapter 32 quiz pool. There's 31 items. I'm going to hit submit. And now I have a random block of questions from the 31 questions in the pool, and I want to give them a 10 question quiz. So it's going to randomly draw 10 questions from that pool, and I'm going to make this quiz worth, say, 5 points. So since I have 10 questions, I have to make each of those questions worth half a point. And as I update it, you can see that I now have in my test, I have 10 questions, and it's worth a total of 5 points. And I will hit OK. I now need to go set my I need to go set the various options. So I'm going to hit submit. It's already selected the chapter 32 quiz we just made. We're going to now create the options. You can see I have the quiz title. I have my description that I put in here before. Maybe I want to add something. I like to open the test in a new window. Again, total preference. I'm going to make it available to the students. Do I want to add an announcement? Not necessarily. In this case, you certainly can. And then I'm going to allow for multiple attempts. And I'm going to allow for unlimited attempts. And I'm going to allow for the highest grade to be recorded of all of those attempts. So you can select you can limit the number of attempts. You can have it only record the lowest grade, or the first grade, or the last, or so on. I'm going to just take the highest grade. Again, it's not very many points. It's a low stakes quiz. I'm trying to give them incentive to take it multiple times so that they're practicing, and also giving them that incentive that they will see a couple of those questions on the exam, which we will do as I make that. You will often see this force completion box. The reason they don't recommend that you check on the force completion is that if a student gets disconnected for whatever reason, let's say you have a single attempt if you have a single attempt test, if you click on this, if they get knocked off the computer, maybe their Wi-Fi goes out or their computer reboots or something along those lines, they will not be able to get back on the test and continue where they left off. It'll basically shut it off and end their test at that point. So it's recommended that you don't do the forced completion. You can set a timer for this quiz. I don't care. They can take as much time as they want. In fact, the more time they take, in my opinion, the better, if they're looking up questions. So in this case, I'm not going to set a timer. And then I'm not going to have a password because I want to give them access to it. What I will do for some of my exams, if I give them in class, is I'll make this exam ahead of time. put a password here, and then in class they'll get the password so they can get access to the test. We're going to leave restriction location alone because unless you can give your test in the testing center, which you would click on this, we're just going to allow them to take it anywhere, and that will include their home. Now if you do have an exception, so let's say you have an accommodation and you need to add someone to give them double time, you do that here under test availability exceptions. You would go to add user or group. Now there's nobody in this course. You would select the student's name from a drop down list here, and you would hit submit. Sorry, it's not letting me do it, but you would add, and then it would give you the option to increase the amount of time. There's a few other options you could change, but the most common accommodation is to give, say, time and a half or double time for tests. You would need to do that here. It's very easy to do. And then of course a due date, and for this one I don't remember what the due date is at the moment. Actually I can look that up. I have the syllabus in front of me. So the due date for this particular quiz is going to be April 5th. And so I would set that. Now, do you want to let them take the test after the due date or not? That's fine. If you do not allow, it just won't show up. If you allow it, what will happen is that it will not give the student an immediate grade. Instead, it will go to your needs grading box, and you'll have to grade it from there. And that way, if you have a policy for late assignments, you could assess your penalty or what have you at that point. Again, for this quiz, I'm not going to. I'll have a due date, but I'm going to let them continue to take it afterward if they want to. Okay, I do have this included in the test and grading center score. And after they submit, in this case, I'm going to let them see all the answers, the correct and the submitted. And that way they can review their questions, see what they got wrong, and then be able to take it again with that information. I like to show all of the tests at once, and you can randomize the questions. I think in this case that's perfectly adequate. Okay, let's submit. And as I scroll down, I now have a quiz. And I'm going to get rid of this placeholder. And I can look down, and I have my chapter 32 set up. I have my notes, I have a video lecture, and I have a quiz that they can practice this material with before taking a test over the entire module. So I would do that for each of these chapters. Before we move on to making the lecture exam, I do want to show you the lecture pool, or the exam pool. And this is the exam pool that I've constructed for this course. And again, I'll show you in the supplemental video here in a moment how to move exam pools from one Blackboard course to another. But this is the exam pool I'm drawing off of, and you can see for 32, for instance, I was drawing from the exam pool and the quiz pool. And so in the lecture exam, I am going to create an exam with all of the chapters for this module. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to course content, go back to module 4, go back to the lecture materials. Oh, I apologize. Go back to module 4, and at the bottom is a lecture. To go past the discussion and assignment is the lecture exam. Again, this is just a placeholder. We're going to have to make an assessment or make a test. Let's go back to the top, and we're going to click on assessments. We're going to click on test, and we're going to create. This is going to be a little bit different than the quiz for a few different reasons. We're going to have more constraints, but we're also going to draw from different pool sets as well. So I'm going to call this exam. This is actually module 4 exam. This exam is going to be worth 70 points, and it's going to have, actually I take that back, it's going to be 75 points, and it's going to be 50 questions. And so I can tell them here, this is where I would add a description. This exam covers chapters 32 through 34 and 40. Okay, so those are the chapters that we're covering in this exam. Again, I would be most likely I would be more descriptive than this, but I'm just going to show you the basics here. So I'm going to hit submit. Okay, I know I have the pools, and so I'm going to create some question sets. And well, question sets allow me to select questions individually, and actually in this case I can still do random blocks, but I'm going to show you question sets here as well. So let's just create a question set. It's going to take me to a familiar window. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to look at the pools. I'm going to select the 32 exam pool, and now I can select individual questions here that I want to add to this question set. Now in this case I'm just going to add them all. I'm going to use this radial or this box up here. I'm going to click on all of them and I'm going to submit. Okay, so I have a question set with 18 questions from my exam pool, but I also mentioned that I like to also add at least a couple of questions from the quizzes. So let's add another question set. And let us go to the 32 quiz pool. And I know all of these are one second here, there we go. I know all of these are multiple choice questions, and so I'm going to add all of them. Now this is worth noting, actually. I need to go back here. I need to look at this first set because maybe not all of them are multiple choice. If I had, and they all are, fortunately, if I had essays and things in there, I would probably want to exclude them, and that's where a question set comes in handy. I can exclude those essays, and that way I can ask those separately, put them in a different block. But now I've got chapter 32, I've got questions from the exam pool. These are questions they have not seen, and so let's say that I'm going to do, I have 4 chapters. I want to do 50 questions, so I need roughly 12 questions each. So I'm going to take 10 questions from this the exam pool. I'm going to take randomly 2 questions from my quiz pool. Oops, I forgot to hit submit. So now I have a total of 12 questions coming from chapter 32. Now we'll change the point value here at the end. Each one of these is going to be worth 1.5 points. But you get the point. You can now see how I'm incorporating some of the quiz questions, but a limited number of them. I'm only going to draw 2 questions from all of those quiz questions they took for chapter 32 chapter quiz, and they're going to see them on the test. Let's go ahead and add our other chapters. Let's go ahead and create a question set here for chapter 33. And do the exam pool. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so I can see everything. I'm going to double check to make sure all of these are multiple choice questions. I'm looking over here to see if they are all multiple choice questions, and they look like they are. I do have some of these pools that have more than that. In fact, I've got 2 questions. One way to be sure, if you don't want to like look through your list, you can also just go here and limit the question types. So you can say I'm going to take a question set from chapter 33 exam pool, and I'm only going to take the multiple choice questions. And then we'll hit, we have to select them all. Apologize for everything moving around. I'm going to select them all, I'm going to hit submit. Okay, so I'm going to now add the rest of these. I'm going to add the rest of these chapters. I'm going to add from each chapter 32, 33, 34. I'm going to add an exam pool and some questions from the quiz pool, and also chapter 40. Should mention that. So I'm going to pause here for a moment, and then I'm going to have them all in here, and we'll talk about the point options and then what to do from there. Okay, I'm back, and I have entered the various question sets. Now, I don't think I did a really good job at this point of really describing why I would use a question set versus a random block. And in the case where I want to just select all of the multiple choice questions, or all of the fill in blank, or even all of the questions for a particular pool, random blocks are great. But if I want to be a little bit more selective, let's say for instance that I want to ask a couple of extra credit questions. And this is where there's a limitation in the way that these exams are constructed. I cannot add extra credit to a block of anything, whether it's a question set or a random block. let's say I wanted to do that, and I want to ask an extra credit question, and I'm going to edit this block. I'm going to show you how this works. Actually, I'm going to delete it, and then I'm going to recreate this question set. So this was question set from 32, and I'm going to create the question set. I'm going to select the 32 exam pool. I'm going to make this bigger so we can see it properly. And this is where I can select individual questions, and you saw how, for instance, there's 18 of them. It's showing them all. Okay, I'm going to select all of them like I did before, but let's say that I want to ask an extra credit question, or maybe two. I'm going to take these two questions off. Maybe those are the two questions I want to ask as extra credit, and I want to make sure all students get that same question. This could be true. Let's say that I have some essay in here, and I want to make sure that they're all asked that one essay. We'll take them out of your block. I'm going to hit submit, and we're going to create this block so it's down at the bottom. I'm going to move it back up to the top. And actually, I'm going to use the reordering tool here. I'm going to use this reordering tool. I'm going to go to the bottom, and I'm going to move it all the way up to the top. I'm going to hit submit, and it'll put it there. Okay. So I've got my block back up at the top. I'm going to ask 10 questions from it. I'm going to have to ask 11 to get 50 questions total. Oops, I take it back to 10. Alright, so I have everything set up to ask 50 questions. We'll get to the points in a second. But now I want to add those 2 extra credit questions. To do extra credit in a test, you have to find a question and add them individually. So you can't add them as a block or a set. You have to find the questions separately. And so I'm going to go down here to this example that I was just at, and I'm going to select those 2 questions that I left out of the set and add them. And it adds them as questions at the end, and you can see that actually shows the question. Now when I click on points, I can change this to extra credit. Change the extra credit, and so now it's not counting those towards the point total for the exam. It's the 52 questions. Now I need to change the point value. I told you this is worth 75 points. I have 50 questions, so I'm going to select all of the blocks here. All questions. I'm going to make each one of them worth 1.5 points. I'm going to update. Now you can update these individually, points per question, or I can do this all. I'm going to do them all. And now I have 52 questions worth 75 points, and 2 of those are extra credit. Now you also notice as I scroll down that the extra credit points changed as well to 1.5. And when they take the test, they will see in parentheses next to the point value that it's extra credit. Okay. So I've created a test that has a couple of extra credit points on it. And going back then to review, a question set allows me to select a subset of questions. I can individually pick which questions end up in that set. Whereas a random block, I select by question type. I select a pool, I select by question types, and then it will select all of those in that pool to add to that block. One of the other advantages I like about random blocks is that when I do that, it shows me which source pool it came from, whereas in the question sets it doesn't. Because in question sets I can select from many different pools at the same time. That's another advantage of question sets. But so the first 2, chapter 32, I put in here as a question set, and down below I entered it as a random block. Now the students won't know any different, and it works the same way. I have a total of 16 questions in this question set, and 10 questions will be drawn randomly from that to show to the student. And that's why each student that takes this is going to see a slightly different test. But at the same time, I'm making sure that I have equal representation from each of the chapters. So I have 12 questions coming from chapter 32, 13 from 33, 13 from 34, and 12 from 40. So I have an equal representation of the chapters. I've got at least a couple of questions from each chapter that they might have seen in the quizzes, and I've got a couple of extra credit. So I'm happy with that test layout. I'm ready to hit OK, and I'm going to go now add my options. Okay, so as I go down, I'll open this test in a new window. I'll make it available to the students. At this point, I will not make it unlimited attempts. I may make it 2 attempts, so I can now go number of attempts to 2. And there's a good reason for doing 2 attempts versus 1, and that is that things tend to go wrong. This will alleviate some of the issues where students got kicked off for some reason, they have to restart the test. However, that's going to be completely up to you, and of course I'm going to accept the highest grade of those 2 attempts. Now this will create a situation, just so you know, where students may take the test without studying first and then go back and then take it again. It increases the potential for sharing, so if you're not comfortable with that, make it just 1 attempt. Again, don't set the forced completion, and this is where I'm going to do the first limitation. Well, this is the second limitation. The first limitation for the students is the fact that each student is getting a slightly different test. The second limitation is time limits. I tend to give about 1.5 minutes up to 2 minutes per question. So in this case I have 52 questions or 50 questions, and so I'm going to give them a normal class length time. We generally meet for about 120 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes, so that's 80 minutes. So I'm going to give 80 minutes as a time limit. And of course, at the end, I'm going to make it auto-submit so that at the end of that 80 minutes, it will submit their test and they will no longer be able to take that test. So of course, the students need to know this, and they'll see it in the test description, but you also need to convey that to them, that it's a time test, one that they're not going to have enough time to look up every question. Okay, I'm not going to set a password. I'm not going to set restrictions on where they can take it. If I need to add any students to the test exemptions, I would do that here. I'm going to make the due date at April 12th in this case. I'm going to include this in the test in the grade center, and I'm only going to show them the answers after the due date. So they're only going to be able to see these answers after their due date, and so they're not going to be able to just keep looking at them and share them with their classmates. Okay, I'm going to present all at once. In this case, I'm not going to randomize the questions because there's already a random component about which questions are being asked, but also I like to keep the blocks of chapters together. It just makes it a little bit more organized for the students' thoughts. All right, let's hit submit. And I now have a Module 4 exam. I'm going to move it up here. I'm going to delete this placeholder, and they can now take that exam whenever they are ready. Now again, I would probably go in here and add more instructions about time limits and making sure they understand they can take this at home, those kinds of things. But this is going to be a good exam for them to take. It's going to equally represent the various chapters, and it's going to be timed, and it's going to be slightly different for each student. Okay, let's move on to the last test type that I want to show you. And when I say test type, I mean test setup, really, because I'm going to set up my module lab exams a little bit different because lab exams themselves are also a little bit different. A lab exam is usually fairly different from a lecture exam in the sense that in lab exams we may have a student identify an organism based on a picture or a slide. We may have a student identify a particular structure on a dissection or on tissue types under a slide as well. So we're going to ask different kinds of questions, and lab exams set themselves up for being able to identify many parts of an organism. And because we can set it up a little bit differently, we're going to have to create a test that's going to be a little bit different as well. And I'll show you what I mean by this. We're going to start a lab exam, and I'm only going to make the exam for one of the labs instead of all of them just for time's sake here. But let's go make a test. We're going to create a test here. We're going to call it Module 4 Lab Exam. Now this lab would cover 4 different labs. This exam would cover 4 different labs, and so I would put that information here in the description. This lab covers the following labs, for instance, and I would spell out the different labs. So lab 10, this is going to be lab 10 through 12. Okay, I'm going to hit submit. and I'm going to start building my test. And you'll see right away why I can't just create a random block of the whole pool and randomly draw questions, because let's go take a look at this. Let's go, and we're going to create a question set, and this is where question sets really become useful here. I'm going to create a question set, and I'm going to make this bigger so that we can see it. Okay, I'm going to move it up. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to go to, we'll pick this first lab topic, deuterostomes, the chordates and vertebrates and the echinoderms, and let's take a look at the different kinds of questions. Now, right now it looks like a normal test pool, but I have it set up such that there are blocks of questions. So to see this, we're going to see the full text on these questions. So you can display the questions and see the full text. And as it does so, as I scroll down, you'll notice I have images in these texts. So here is a single image, and I don't have it copied elsewhere because of the type of question, although I realize I'm going to have to edit that at some point. But as I look down, for instance, here I have a picture of a dissected rat that I have labeled in PowerPoint and created an image. And I have 4 potential questions I could ask on it. So I asked the question for each of those. Well, I don't want to ask the students each one of those letters because I have a lot to ask them in this test. Instead, I want to be able to ask my students maybe one of these, but each student is going to get a different one. So a student might randomly get asked to identify letter C, or another one might get asked to identify letter B, and so on. And so I'm going to create blocks of these types of questions like this rat picture, and that way they will only get one question, but it'll be random from that block of questions. So I'm going to start. I have a series of questions up here that do not have multiples, so I'm going to create my first block of these questions and hit submit. And so I've got a block of questions here, and I'm going to, because none of these are repeat questions, I'm going to select, say, 4 of these. I'm going to go up and create another block. Question set. I'm going to go to the same. I'm going to just click here to maximize this. I'm going to go to the same pool, and I'm going to go ahead and display full text again. And I'm going to click on my rat dissection images. And that's going to be a block. Now as I scroll down, I'm going to just show you all the different types of blocks I can make. I can make a block of these starfish images. So I've got 4 of those. Well, I only see 3. There's probably one floating around here. I have a frog images. I have 3 of those. I have more rat images of different internal structures. I have Amphioxus, and there's several of those. I have, and you can see sometimes they're not next to each other. I have perch images, and you can see I have lots of these. So I'm going to create another block, or this block I haven't created it yet. I've got these images selected. I'm going to hit submit. And so now I have 2 blocks. Now you can see that this is going to be a more intensive type of test formation. I'm going to have to go and form a block of each question type. And I'll give you one more example before we finish this. I'm going to create another question set, and there's one of the ones I like because it's a little bit bigger set, and that's, I'm going to go to my deuterostomes. I'm going to go to full text display. I'm also going to go to the bottom quickly because I know I'm not seeing everything. I'm going to show all, and I'm going to choose this perch one. I'm going to zoom up. I'm scrolling up to make sure I'm not missing any of them. So now I'm scrolling down. I'm going to select this one. I'll select this one. I'll keep going, and there should be 6 of these. So I've got 3. And if you'll recall back all the way back to the video about making pools, I did this. I demonstrated this. It's quite easy to make these because you can just copy your question and just change the letter very quickly. Okay, I believe I've gotten them all. I'm just going to zoom down quickly. Yes, so I have all of the questions that I want for this block. I'm going to hit submit. Alright, so I have now created 3 blocks, and I'm going to have to create more to complete this test. But in this case, for instance, maybe I want the students to be asked 2 questions on the perch because I have more options. So currently, and we're not going to complete this test here, but I think you get the idea. I have a set of 6 questions that are all not repeats, and I can go and look at them just to make sure I have the right questions in there. These are, and in fact, I don't. I'm going to have to take some of these out because 4 of them are, and I forgot to look at them, 4 of them are hotspots, and they're the same question, but they're supposed to click on a different one. So I'm going to remove them. So this is a good opportunity to show how to remove this. I can remove some of these, and I'm going to remove the questions. So I would have to make a block of those hotspots. So in this way, now I'm just going to have them see each one of those. So this is not going to be a random display. It's going to choose all of them in this question set. So that's good to make sure that we go and look at those things, because then I realize I'm going to have to go make a block of those hotspot questions. So I may have 10, 15 different blocks, but if I set it up right, what this is going to mean for the student is that each student is going to get asked a question on the rat anatomy, for instance. And each student is going to get asked a question on the fish anatomy. And in fact, each one will get asked 2, but they will not all get the same question. And that's the important part here. If we want to reduce the chance that our students are copying off of each other, of sharing questions, and just getting together and taking the test together, having a timed test and having these types of block questions where it's randomly choosing from blocks or pools or both, then you can have a more effective test. And I will tell you from my experience that when I do give take-home tests, that the grade distribution is generally pretty close to the grade distribution of an exam that I give in class or through the testing center. And so I feel pretty confident that this is a good way of giving a test, of building a test, and not just throwing up questions that everybody sees. I think you have to have a little bit more forethought and planning involved in making your test, but if you do it right, you can have a very good test design and something that the students will have a difficult time not being prepared for if they want to do well for the class. Okay, I'm just going to hit OK here. We would go through the various mechanisms. Now, of course, this exam is not complete because I still need to add questions to it, but I'm going to go ahead and add the actually, I'm not going to make it available to students yet because it's not done, but I'm going to go ahead and finish up my options. I'm going to allow for 2 attempts. I'm going to set a timer. I'm going to set this timer for, I'm going to reduce the time because I'm not going to ask that many questions for 50 minutes, so I should be asking about 30 questions, maybe 35 questions in that time. And I'm going to then go down and I'm going to have a due date of April 12th. And I'm just going to go ahead and also I want to set the same thing that I had before. After the due date is when they can view the test or view the answers, so that they're not looking at the answers and sharing that with other students. Alright, I'm going to hit submit. As I go down, I can now see I have a Module 4 exam. I'm going to delete the placeholder. You can also see, as I go back down, that it is grayed out right now because it's not available. When it's available, I can go back into edit and make it available, or I can just do the shortcut and make it available here. I know I'm going to need to add more questions, so I can go back and edit the test, or I can edit the test options. The test options were how many times they are allowed to take the test, what's the time limit, that kind of thing. But I can also go back to edit the test. I'm back where I was before, adding questions to this. And I would want to add questions for all 4 labs, and then once I'm done, then I would go and make the test available. One last thing I would need to do is I would need to make sure that my points reflected what I wanted for my point total. So this lab exam is going to be worth 50 points, so obviously as I add questions, I'm going to need to change the point value of each of these questions, and I can do that individually by clicking on the individual boxes next to these question sets. or I can do it as a whole by selecting all, entering the points here, and updating that. Okay, so hopefully you see that there's different ways you can build a test. They can be effective for students in different environments, whether they're taking a quiz or a lecture exam or a lab exam. I hope this has been helpful to you to decide how to plan your exams, and I look forward to talking to you in the next lesson.